Bye-bye, darling. Thank you. It's been some weeks since I've been here. December 31, is that correct? All right. And I spoke to you last time I came a little bit about the plane. And since that time, Dave and I have actually created a video. And so I'm just going to give you a teaser of that video. And so for those that would like to know, if you don't have Facebook or YouTube and you'd like to get a copy of the video at some stage, please make sure you give me your name and number. This is just a teaser of the video, and then I'd like to share a bit more about what we're doing and what we've decided to do. Thank you.
Well, mate, here we go again.
Well, I don't know what we're doing here, though.
Well, nowhere else to go. Why not?
Yeah, but I mean, we can't really use this thing.
I know, but we've got to have a look.
Oh,
Make sure it's still there.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go and have a look. Let's have a look. Well, she's still there.
Yeah, but it's not going anywhere, is it?
Oh, that's a shame. Well, let's open the hanger. You do that one, I'll do this one.
All right.
Yeah. I'll do this one. You do that one?
Yeah,
You do that one? Okay. Well, I don't get it. If we can't go anywhere, why are we showing everybody the plane?
Well, if we're not going, well, the first question, why aren't we going anywhere?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe what we should do, why don't we pull the plane out and then we can show them why we're not going anywhere. How about that?
That's
okay?
a better
All right,
idea.
let's do that. All right, so we're going to...
Okay, well, I need you to explain to me when I'm looking at this beautiful aircraft.
Yep.
I've got 2 wings,
Yeah?
3 wheels.
Yep.
Oh, actually, I've
Everything.
got 4 wings.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Prop.
Yep.
Everything's in place. It all looks really good.
Yep.
Why isn't it going anywhere?
Well, the problem
Why
is...
aren't we on it?
Well, this is the problem. There's a problem. So the biggest problem is...
There you go. There's the easy answer.
There's no engine oil.
No engine oil. Is that all it's missing?
No, but there's also a problem here, David. See down here, I don't know if people can see that. Hope they can. Right down here, right just there where I'm pointing my finger, there's a little crack. It's tiny, David. It's really little. It's about 2 centimetres. 2 centimetres, but you know what?
Well, I'm sure there's other cracks in the thing. What's that? Why is
No,
that a
well
problem?
that there creates a leak. Now that's in the crankcase. Now that's a problem because that means that the engine now, because I had it in for maintenance, they can't allow me to fly it anymore. It's unsafe. It means other things could go wrong. In fact, we could have had a catastrophic failure.
So are you telling me they found this while this was on the ground when
Yeah,
they
so
could
we
have-
had
could have
maintenance.
found it in the air?
That would have been bad. So number one, David, that's a praise point right there, isn't it? Because we can thank God that they found it in maintenance.
Yeah.
Number 2, we can thank God that we weren't in the air at the time. And we can thank God for all the hours we have done.
Yeah.
So what I thought we could do is show the people about the plane, what they inside, around, what we do, and also show them what we've been able to do over the last couple of years. What do you think?
Okay.
We're looking at it down there.
I can see the ground.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
It's rather concerning when you're inside the plane.
Well, that's
thinking
okay.
you're safe.
Don't have to
There's a
worry
big
about that.
hole in there.
Anyway, he's really is my best co-pilot. It's okay, don't worry. So let's go and show them inside. Do you think?
Yep.
Maybe you could show them your seat.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's do that.
All right.
Okay. All right, we're good. Let's lock it up. You good?
Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, let's lock it up.
Nice.
That's a teaser.
Well, mate, here we go again.
Been doing a lot of praying about and a lot of thought about what we should do. And I've decided that I've got nothing to lose but to try and see if we can fundraise for a new engine, for an overhauled engine. Now, that's a big ask. That's a huge task. But for God, who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, it's not big, is it? And so we've decided we've really got nothing to lose if we don't give it a try. And so in my prayer time, in my thinking, a name came to mind, and his name was Bill Knott. Does anyone know who Bill Knott is? He's the editor of the Adventist Review. Now, Robbie and I met him in Townsville in 2013, and we became friends. He liked Robbie and I for some reason. And since that time, he stayed in contact with Robbie and I. In fact, he wrote an article in Adventist Review. Did you see it? About the plane and about the mission. If not, we've got about 50 copies. We'll show you. But that article went around the world about what's been happening in the Torres Strait with the plane and with mission. And so from that time, Bill and I kept in contact quite regularly. When I left the Torres Strait, we did a couple of times, but since then we've left it for a while. And I thought, why don't I contact Bill and have a talk to him? Well, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I contacted him and said, Bill, would love to catch up. And he said, Darren, I really would love to. I've been praying and thinking about you guys for the last couple of years, and he really looked forward to that. So we got together one night. It was Friday night for me. It was Friday morning for him. He's 13 hours before. And he's a guy who's the head or the editor of Adventist Review. They're doing a lot of work in media space at the moment, and he's a very, very busy man. But he gave me a full hour or more of his time, and we just chatted for a full hour. We prayed together. I talked about our problem eventually. We talked about many things. And Darren, he said, look, there's plenty of money out there. It's just connecting the right people with the need. And so he's got a heap of ideas, and we're in the middle of producing this video. There'll be a short version, a long version for those that love. I couldn't cut it all out. I mean, David's hilarious. I mean, on your own, it's boring, but he just adds a dynamic in there I never was expecting. And we just did that. We just got in there and just chatted. I didn't know where it was going to go. And we just went there one afternoon and just went for it. And I just said, well, it's there. And if anyone wants to see the full length, it's about 25 minutes. But, that's for those that like to see detail and just talk about it all. But pray for that how that video goes, where it goes, people will see that what we're doing is a benefit, that how we're using God's money and his finances and his tools and his resources is for his work and not for ours. So please pray for that. And thank you for your support over the years too. That's amazing. Just been able to get there last time and as we continue moving forward. For now, we don't know how long it's going to take to raise the money. We've given ourselves this year to raise the money. We're already planning some concerts. And so if you feel you'd like to do a concert with David or down here even, maybe talk to me about that. There's a possibility. We're doing one in Narrabeen. We'll do one in Perth. And we're trying to do whatever we can to raise some money. And we'll take the story worldwide if we have to and see how God's plan meets that. And in the meantime, we still need your prayers to make our way there as we hire a plane. Next month, the end of this month, we plan to go again. We'll hire a plane and we'll go again. The need is greater, not less. And so we pray for that as we continue on. Let's pray just before we open God's Word. Lord, I just want to thank you so much that we can come and spend some time together in your Word, looking at an amazing story. I pray, Lord, that you'll be with us, that you'll guide us, Jesus, in your precious name. Amen. The man weaved his way through the streets at night. He was on a donkey, and he was looking at looking at all the city and what was happening to the city, and he purposely did it at night because he didn't want anyone to know his purpose for doing it. He wanted to see the extent of the damage. He wanted to see the extent of the walls and what needed to be done. He had it on his heart God had put it on his heart to look at the whole situation, and God had put this task before him to fix it. No one else had done it before him, and so he decided that as he looked at all the damage at night, and as he took note of every situation, he was more determined than ever that he would complete the task that was before him. But he wasn't sure how the people would react or whether they would even be willing to be part of this ambitious plan. I'd like you, if you don't mind, if you would open your Bibles with me to the book of Nehemiah. And the title of my sermon today is Don't Stop building the wall. Nehemiah chapter 1. There's actually a saying, and if I can have my first slide up, please, Jason. There's a saying. There's a saying that says, "A wall in ruins leads to a what? A city in ruins." And he saw this wall. Nehemiah saw the wall, and it was broken down in many places. And it was very disheartening for him. And here Nehemiah is. It's just before the book of Esther, Darren. It's before the book of Psalms, before the book of Job. There it is, book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 1 to 4. And it says, "The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, it came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the citadel." Now, where was he? Does anyone know where he was at the time? Where's Shushan? Well, China, yeah. Well, he was actually in Persia. And it says that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah. So obviously Nehemiah wasn't in Judah, was he? Nehemiah was in Judah, so they came in the month of Chislev, and which is about September. And I asked him concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, "The survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates are burned with fire." So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days, and was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Nehemiah was what? Do you know what he was? What was Nehemiah? Nehemiah was the cupbearer to king. And here he was a long way. He was a Jew, and he was the cupbearer to the king. He lived in all the pomp and splendor of the king. Now, he wasn't, and so as a cupbearer, he had many privileges, and even the clothes he wore would have been beautiful clothes, and he would have been fed very nice food and looked after very well. He had to be at the beck and call of the king, but he was right there, and so it's interesting to find that when he heard about his people that were in great distress and reproach, and it says they're in great distress and reproach, the walls of Jerusalem is also broken down and the gates burned with fire. And yet here Nehemiah fasts and prays to the God of heaven. To the God of heaven. And let's just read on a little bit further on. "And I said, O Lord, pray, O great, awesome, you who keep your covenant and mercy, you and who love you and observe your covenants, your commandments, please let your ear be attentive and your ears open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now day and night for children of Israel, your servants." And so he asked God to confess their sins and to forgive him of his sins. And so he puts the burden before God, and he recognizes that the reproach of the people were because the fact they didn't have a city that they could call their own. The walls were broken down, that the city was in ruins. And so all the nations around them were laughing at them, that God's people were laughed upon because their city was in ruins. And so he saw that as a national disaster. That here is a city that the people that follow God, and their city, the city of God, is in ruins. So all the people and the nations around them were laughing at them, but more importantly, they were laughing at their God. And so Nehemiah fasts and prays for many days. And so he decides that he himself would take on the task of going and arranging for the walls to be built and to bring the people back together. You know, friends, God is looking for people today to take on tasks of finishing the work of the three angels' message. Someone who says, this work is too big. This work is too big, but by faith and prayer, I am going to take on a task for God. It may seem insurmountable, but they say, you know what, it doesn't matter how insurmountable the problem is. I'm going to stand fast, I'm going to stand firm, and I'm going to be a Nehemiah, and I'm going to do my best to take the message of the three angels to the people. He's looking for people that won't be influenced by money and power like Nehemiah. People that be willing to stand for God's cause and rally people together in this fight to finish. He needs people to be willing to commit to the task and to prayerfully keep going. And so there's three things I want to look at today. The first thing is, number one, to be prayerful and deliberate in our planning. To be prayerful and to be deliberate in our planning. And so I want you to continue reading with me in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1 to 4. It came to pass in the month of Nisan. So it's interestingly, when he first heard the news, it said in chapter 1 that he fasted and prayed for many days. Now, do you know how long he fasted for before he actually went to the king? So effectively, it tells us it came to pass in the month of Nisan. Now, if you do a bit of research, he first heard the news in the month of Chislev, which is, I think, about November, December. And then he went to the king in the month of Nisan, which is about March. How long is that? About 4 months. 4 Jewish months. Now, I know their months will be different. So about 4 Jewish months before he went to the king. So he spent time prayerfully planning, thinking, being deliberate, knowing where he was to head, asking God for his guidance before. He didn't rush in and just blurt out to the king. He actually spent time thinking. And so he was deliberate in his planning. He knew what it was. God had impressed him about what was needed. And so for 4 months he petitioned the God of heaven and he asked that he would be given an opportunity to speak directly with the king. And so if we look at Nehemiah chapter 2, we can see that result of the 4 months of prayer and planning. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of the king Artaxerxes, when wine was brought before him, that I took the wine and gave to the king. Now I'd never been sad in his presence before. Verse 2, therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad since you're not sick? So in this time, the prophets and king tells us that he had tried his best to hide it, but just the sadness on his face couldn't be taken away. And eventually the king noticed that he was sad, that there was something different. It wasn't because he was sick. There was something wrong. He said, there's nothing but sorrow of heart. Even the king was able to work out there was something wrong with Nehemiah, and he asked after him. He said, so I became dreadfully afraid and said to the king, my king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tomb, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire? Then the king said to me, what do you request? And what does he say next? What does it say next? In verse 4. And so I prayed to the God in heaven. You know, there are times where we don't have time to mouth a prayer. We don't have time to kneel down. But there's times when our thought becomes a prayer. And he had a thought that went as a prayer, and he prayed to the God in heaven. But before that, he'd already spent months in prayer, months in fasting. But at that instant, he was able to request the God of heaven for more wisdom, more understanding. And so in verse 5, he was able to have the guidance to know exactly what to say to Artaxerxes. And so he said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. Amazing, isn't it? Here you are, the cupbearer of the king, and you're asking for him to send you for however long it's going to take to rebuild the city. He might say, well, hang on a second, what about my cupbearer? What am I going to do there? Who's going to bring my food to me? What does the king say to him? And it says, and the queen sitting beside him, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set a time. And I set a time. I gave him a time. Nehemiah gave him a time. And then he said, then here, would you even believe it? He had the gall to ask provisions. Let's have a look. Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass. So he's thinking about travel. He's getting his travel documents, he's getting his visa and his passport ready. So he doesn't have any issues at the border. That they must permit you to pass. So he's thinking about his travel documents. And then in verse 8, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber. It's like, would you give me the keys to Bunnings and I'll take what I like? Give me the keys to the forest. Give me the keys to the forest. And so he asked provisions. That I must take timber to make the beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple for the city wall and for the house that I'll occupy. And it says, and the king granted them to me according to the good hand of what? My God upon me. It was this chapter in Nehemiah that gave me the confidence to say, you know what, God? I've got nothing to lose but to pray and ask that he'll provide an engine. It's the courage that Nehemiah had after he prayed and fasted for many days that he had that showed me that, you know what, I've got nothing to lose. God, if this is your will, if this is your work, I'll be willing to pray and ask the king for provisions and for an engine. I have no fear. If God provides it, he provides it. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I have no fear. But I've got nothing to lose but to try. And so in verse 10, verse 9, and then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. And then verse 10, were the people happy to see him? When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite and the official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. People around him were not happy because someone was coming to help the people. When we step out of our comfort zone and do God's work, there won't be people happy all the time. Do you know that? You may not always get the response you expect to get. People may mock you. They may want to throw stones at you. They may want to throw you out. But Nehemiah was never perturbed by the opposition that he received when he went and arrived at Judah. And so the verses now tell us about his story as he got up in verse 11 and he rose in the night. He took the men and he went through Jerusalem. And he went by night to the valley gate. He viewed the walls which were broken and he took note. Prophet and King tells us that having all those notes that he made helped him to be able to talk to the people exactly what was going on. It impressed them that he knew so much about the detail. And verse 16, the officials did not know where I'd gone or what I'd done, for I had not yet told them about the story. Verse 17 says, then I said, you see the distress we are in, how Jerusalem lies in waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. And so they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. Do you notice that he had a responsibility to share how God is good, how God had provided? And it's one thing that Dave and I realise, that as we have been coming and sharing with this little church here, how God has been good. We haven't done it to the wider community. And so this year we decided that we would actually take more effort to actually do more videos and allow people to see where God's hand had been for us. Nehemiah was being faithful in sharing with the whole community how the king had helped him with all the provisions and how God had gone before him as he fasted and prayed. And so all his planning and deliberate effort had come about. But he also shared how God had been good through the hand of the king. And so the people were encouraged. And the Bible tells us that they said then they set their hands to the work. They were encouraged to move forward. And so we need to be willing to continue to share with others how amazing God is. In the book Prophets and Kings, it says this: Nehemiah's whole soul was in the enterprise he had taken. His hope, his energy, his enthusiasm, his determination were contagious, inspiring others with the same high courage and lofty purpose. Each man became a Nehemiah in his turn and helped to make stronger the heart and hand of his neighbour. And so Nehemiah was able to encourage each person, but then that person took on that same encouragement and that same contagious enthusiasm, and so they encouraged the next person and the next person. So it wasn't just the responsibility of Nehemiah, it became the responsibility of his neighbour and the next person, until everybody became excited about building the wall again. Isn't that the same with us? When we can become enthusiastic for God's work, that the people around us, it becomes contagious. But if we just all we have to say is negative things about it, what do you think the next person's going to say? Are they going to be enthusiastic about doing something for God? Or is it going to be, nah, it's too hard? And yet there'll always be opposition to God's work in one form or another. Verse 19, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab hermit, they laughed at it and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? Was he rebelling against the king? Or did he have permission from the king? No matter what people say. And so the second thing is not to be distracted by the opposition or people who may act like the opposition through their inactivity. Do you get that? We may get distracted by the actual opposition, but there may be people in our midst that distract us by actually having no activity at all. Let's read verse 19. We've read that. So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will prosper us, and therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no inheritance or right or memorial in Jerusalem. We'll go ahead anyway. We'll go ahead in faith, but you will have nothing to do with the end result. And so the people set together and started to build. It became infectious, and the work moved forward with good progress. And if you read that whole chapter in chapter 3, it's amazing when you look at it. Do you know who were the first people to start building? Who were the first people? If you look through there quickly and tell me, who were the first people? It was Eliashib the who? The high priest. The leaders started working first. The leaders started working first. It became contagious. The priests kept working, and away they went, and it encouraged them to keep going. Encouraged them to keep going. Verse 5 said this: next to them, the Tekelites made repairs, but their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. The nobles were also Israelites, but they made a choice not to get involved. And so we must be willing to help no matter what. It becomes a responsibility. In fact, it says in Prophets and Kings, in every religious movement, there are some who, while they cannot deny the cause is God's, still hold themselves aloof, refusing to make any effort to help. It were well for such ones to remember the record kept on high, that book in which there are no omissions, no mistakes, and out of which they will be judged. There, every neglected opportunity to do service for God is recorded, but I love this. But there too, every deed of faith and love, every deed of faith and love is held in everlasting remembrance. All the things that we do for good, for God, is held in everlasting remembrance. Don't you love that? That what we do for God is never ever forgotten. Let's turn to chapter 4 and continue on the story in verse 6, chapter 4 and verse 6. And so he built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. And then it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard the walls of Jerusalem being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. And then Judah said, the strength of labourers is failing, so there's much rubbish. And all our adversaries said, they'll neither know nor see anything till we come and kill them. And so it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came, they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they'll be upon us. Therefore Nehemiah was very careful, and he positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set people there. And he looked and arose and said to the nobles, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Verse 14, do not be afraid of them. Remember, the Lord is great and awesome, and fight for our brethren and your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. And it happened when the enemies heard that it was known to us that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all us returned to the wall, everyone to his work. And so it was, that was it. So verse 20, I love this. Verse 20, whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, what is it? Rally to us here. Who's going to fight for us? Our God will fight for us. When we have distractions, when we have problems, when we have issues, when we're doing God's work, we must rally together because God will fight for us. Don't we forget that? Sometimes we feel that we're just together on our own, that we're just a little group, but we forget that God will come and fight our battles for us. He's done it all the way through the Bible. Why do you think he's going to stop now? The battle is the Lord's, not ours. But the distractions were persistent. If you turn with me to Nehemiah chapter 6, the distractions kept happening. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of the enemies heard that I'd rebuilt the wall, there were no breaks left in it. Although at the time I'd not hung the doors, then Sanballat the Geshem sent to me saying, come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me harm. So I sent messages to them saying, I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down. Why should the work cease? Why leave and go down to you? Distractions will persist and rumours increase. But he said, I will not go and waste my time because there's work that needs to be done. We must keep going with the work, not allow the distractions to stop doing what God would have us to do. Verse 4, but they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. And Sanballat sent his servant to me as before. The 5th time, an open letter, and this time they accused him of rebelling against the king. And then he said to them, no, in verse 8, no such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. He calls their own bluff, for they were trying to make us afraid, saying their hands be weakened in their work, and it will not be done. And then he prays, now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. We must not get distracted by the opposition. And more than anything, he didn't react when the people reacted. When the people made accusations, he didn't react. If we react, we might sin and make the matter worse. If he had gone down and fought with them, he may have made the matter worse. But he said, you know what? I'm not even going to go down. I'm not going to enter into controversy. I'm just going to continue on with my work. Let them think what they're going to think and not be distracted. Verse 10, afterward I came to the house of Shemaiah, who was a secret informer, and he said, let us meet together. In verse 11, I said, should such a man as I flee, and who is there such as I would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all, but he'd pronounced his prophecy against me because Tobiah the Sanbalite had hired him. For this reason he was hired, that I should be afraid and act the way and what? And sin. So that they may have a cause for an evil report, that they may reproach me. He realised that they wanted him to have a bad name, and he decided that he wasn't going to make the matter worse. Prophet the King says this, but like Nehemiah, God's people are neither to fear nor to despise their enemies. Putting their trust in God, they are to go steadily forward, doing his work with unselfishness and committing to his providence the cause for which they stand. They were trying to make Nehemiah sin and therefore reproach him and stop his work. So we cannot afford to stop building that wall, not stopping his work because we have opposition. We have to keep on keeping on. The third thing is that the work of the Lord is not for our glory, but only ever for God's glory. The work of the Lord is never for our glory. It's always for God's. In verse 15 of chapter 6, so the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul. In how many days? Do you know how many days? The Bible tells us it was in 52 days. In a short 52 days, the wall was restored back to the full height. The people had a mind to work, and they got together, and with a large army of people, they were able to finish the wall in 52 days. Because one person was willing to put aside the opposition and to put their hand to the plough and rally the people and keep on keeping on. In 52 days. And then it happened in verse 16, when all the enemies heard it, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived, why? They perceived that this work was done by our God. The glory was never theirs. It wasn't, look at the wall we've built. Look at what we've been able to do. Nehemiah said, look at the work that I've done. Look at the people I brought together. The nations around perceived that the work was done because of God. The glory always goes to God. They perceived that it was from God. And I love how he says in verse 20, for they, whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally, for God will fight. God had fought for them. Friends, no matter how crafty Satan is in his opposition, God will and can detect every single scheme. And we talked about it this morning. Satan is using every scheme possible. From mental disorders, as Alex said, to consumerism, as we're talking about in the lesson. Every single distraction that's been thrown at the world is being throwing at us right now. Time is thrown at us. We don't have time to do this. We don't have time to do that. We don't have time to do God's work. In fact, we can be so busy doing God's work, we don't have time for him. Every single dart possible is being thrown at us right now. But you know what? God can detect every single scheme, and he can bring them to nothing. But you and I have to be willing to search them. We need to be aware of them, aware that they exist, and be not put our heads in the sand, but to look to God and look for his deliverance. Look for his wisdom, as Nehemiah did. Romans 8:31 says, and then we shall say to these things, if God is for us, who can be against us? And so the rebuilding the wall was synonymous with building up God's glory among the nations around about. As God's wall was being built, it built up the glory of God among the people who had despised the Hebrews. And yet the people around could see that all the work that was being done by their God. The story doesn't end there, because Nehemiah then spends the next 12 years with the people. And he builds their life up spiritually. He builds them back as a nation. God uses Nehemiah to bring them back to his word, to his law. So the nation then starts to worship God the way they always were meant to. And so it's a high time for the Hebrews. And so the sharing of the three angels' message is also about building up God's church, to build up the message for these last days. The question is, are we going to be willing participants? Will we put our shoulders to the work? Will we be a Nehemiah and be willing and enthusiastic so that we can encourage the next person and the next person, the next person? Or will we be one of the nobles who didn't put their shoulder to the work? You see, we need prayerful, deliberate planning. We can't allow ourselves to be distracted by the opposition or by people who act like the opposition through their inactivity. And we have to remember that the work is for God's glory and not ours. He's looking for people like Nehemiah that won't be turned off by hardship and trial, who won't be turned off because their engine doesn't work anymore. It won't be turned off because we don't get as many people to our programs. We won't be turned off when people call us names, or you Adventist this, or you that, or you whatever it is. God is looking for dependable people who'll be willing to rally the troops and be a Nehemiah in these last days and do whatever it takes, because no matter what happens, we can't stop building the wall.